The subject of this video is going to be the 2019 horror film, Midsommar. My intent is to examine this film and the subsequent internet reactions and analysis as an extended form of manipulation and gaslighting. This is a larger project which I'm going to split up into several parts, so I thought I'd give you a heads up ahead of time on the structure and aim of this video. I'll start with a brief synopsis of the film and then cover the pop culture reactions to the film as symptoms of disturbing and ultimately dangerous emergent and pervasive trends in popular media and culture in general, ultimately suggesting that the massive online response to the film, most importantly the viral breakdowns and explanations claiming to unpack the movie's subtle and often overlooked or obscure meaning, are actually misleading gaslighting by design. Now, before the 1940s, the term gaslighting simply meant lighting a home or an area with gas lights. It now means something else. Before we get into that, I'm going to unpack in this series an old idea. I'll be incorporating a concept that is not new, that pop culture entertainment, particularly films, are used as propaganda and can promote dangerous ideas that negatively affect individuals and society. So not a new idea. But we're also going to go deeper than that. I'm also going to introduce a new idea that pop culture media, including but not limited to movie reviews and the increasingly popular and viral film analysis and fan theories on social media, cooperate with intentionally disruptive entertainments to magnify their negative influence. In other words, the breakdowns of these popular films are part of the gaslighting. Now, gaslighting in and of itself is a term that's used as a colloquialism these days, and it's thrown around casually, and I believe its overusage possibly is causing people not to take it too seriously. But this is a very serious form of psychological manipulation, and it's incredibly popular of a term lately, I believe because the usage of gaslighting is increasing, and that's why this 80-year-old term is so heavily trending lately. Essentially, we're talking about psychological manipulation. Gaslighting is a colloquialism for a specific type of psychological manipulation in which the manipulator is successful in having the target, a person or a group of people, question their own reality, memory, or perceptions. There is often a power dynamic in gaslighting where the target is vulnerable because they are fearful of losses associated with challenging the manipulator. Does that sound familiar? Now, the term is derived from a 1939 British play, Angel Street. That play was adapted into a 1940 British film, Gaslight, and there was a more famous 1944 American remake of the same name. The title of the films refers to gaslights in a couple's home that the husband periodically dims. The wife repeatedly asks her husband to confirm her perceptions about the dimming and flickering lights, and he insists the lights haven't changed. His intention is to have her ultimately committed to a mental institution. The play and films introduced the term gaslighting into public vernacular to refer to a specific type of manipulation, one in which a person's reality itself is hijacked by another. This can also be manifested by minimization, deflection, denial, and coercive control. The term is now ubiquitous, and we apply it not just to close relationships, but also to any reality bending that is generated by institutions, media, and leaders. Word usage is tracked and available for research purposes online, and as you can see here, the term gaslight typically meant just the gas lighting, the actual lighting of lamps with gas, until the 1940s, at which point it was used as the colloquialism. You can see over the past couple of years there's been a huge spike in its usage, and I believe there's very good reason for that. Gaslighting once referred to extreme manipulation that could induce mental illness or justify commitment to a psychiatric institution. It is now used more generally in a non-literal sense and too often for rhetorical or exaggerated effect. The term is now simply defined as to make someone question their perception of reality. It's kind of like watching the news. I definitely think it's worth noting here that the great insight of the films was to remind us that gaslighting is actually a grooming process, not just a singular event of misinformation. It's a process of establishing and then exploiting trust and authority to achieve an end game of control and dominance. So in regards to Midsommar and similar films, what makes them gaslighting? Embedded in these dangerous entertainments are subtle and hidden in plain sight methods of incepting a form of cognitive dissonance in viewers and society, in which true paradigms are inverted and then reinforced through pop culture, where truths become lies, virtues become character defects, and evil is even celebrated and defended. We are under the influence of unprecedented media gaslighting.
Yes, for all intents and purposes, I am a woman.
The courageous, the stunning Caitlyn Jenner.
All across this country, right now, all across the world, at this very moment, there are young people coming to terms with being transgender.
It is because in America, in 2007, had exactly one gender clinic. One. Anyone care to guess how many we have now? 300.
How did you know?
Know what?
That you're what you are.
How did you know?
I'm not sure that I do know.
Gender dysphoria, the severe discomfort in one's biological sex, is absolutely real. It's also exceedingly rare, typically afflicting roughly 0.01% of the population, and overwhelmingly males, so roughly 1 in 10,000 males, meaning nobody you went to high school with.
It can bite you with its fiery breath, like a poisonous snake, and it can burn things like fire. And it's an aerial predator that can take you from the air, and it's a carnivorous predator that can take you from the ground, and it's reptilian.
And the typical next step for these kids, after changing their name and pronouns to their friends and classmates, is puberty blockers. Puberty blockers shut down the part of the pituitary that directs the release of hormones catalyzing puberty. The most common of these drugs is called Lupron, a drug that was originally used in the chemical castration of sex offenders. To this day, it has never been FDA approved to halt healthy puberty.
Let's just say there's a vaccine that is approved and even distributed before the election. Would you get it?
Well, I think that's going to be an issue for all of us.
If and when the vaccine comes. And it's not likely to go through all the tests that needs to be, and the trials that are needed to be done.
When we finally do, God willing, get a vaccine, who's going to take the shot? Who's going to take the shot?
I want to go talk to Peterson. Peterson!
Put it on.
You put it on.
Okay. I don't know if it's really me.
Now you might ask, why would any parent or doctor do this? Why would anyone stop the puberty in a child, even a child with genuine gender dysphoria, when that child would be highly likely to outgrow the gender dysphoria if left alone? Some say because it's traumatizing to let a child go through the puberty of the sex to which they don't wish to belong. The problem of this, of course, is that in many cases, puberty does seem to have helped children overcome their gender dysphoria. But there really is no satisfying answer to why someone would do this, given that scientists have no way of predicting which children will outgrow the dysphoria on their own and which won't. But the argument that's made is that these kids can't wait. The suicide rates for the trans-identified youth and trans adults are very high, the argument goes, and so we need to get in there and start fixing them as soon and dramatically as possible. But unfortunately, there are no long-term studies that indicate that puberty blockers cure suicidality or even that they produce better mental health outcomes. There are not even good studies that show they are safe for this population long-term, nor that they are reversible. There's a big debate right now in the medical community about whether and to what extent the effects of stopping healthy puberty in adolescence is reversible if these kids later stop taking them. What we do know is that puberty blockers will block all the secondary sex characteristics, sexual maturation, and development of bone density from occurring. We do know that because of the inhibition of bone density and other risks, doctors don't like to keep a child on puberty blockers for more than 2 years. And we know that once a child's healthy puberty is arrested, placing her entirely out of step with her peers, this seems to guarantee that she will proceed to cross-sex hormones like testosterone. In studies, nearly 100% of kids who are put on puberty blockers proceed to cross-sex hormones. And we know that if a child goes from puberty blockers to cross-sex hormones, that child will be infertile. She may also have permanent sexual dysfunction, given that her sex organs never reached adult maturity, but she will certainly be infertile. So the claim that puberty blockers are safe and reversible for this population is not well-founded. And the claim that it's a neutral intervention, just a pause button, they say, without serious downsides, is simply false. We wouldn't accept this level of glib salesmanship in any other area of medicine.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
Think about it. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men and women created by you know the thing.
Okay, so those are the kids who actually have gender dysphoria. For the nearly 100-year history of diagnosing gender dysphoria, these little kids were what we were talking about when we talked about gender dysphoria. But in the last decade, that thanks in large part to social media, there's been another population that claims to have gender dysphoria. This is a population that never before had gender dysphoria in any significant numbers. In fact, before 2007, there was no extant scientific literature on their having gender dysphoria at all. Teenage girls. This is the phenomenon Brown University public health researcher Dr. Lisa Littman called rapid onset gender dysphoria. And it refers to a sudden spike in transgender identification among teen girls with no childhood history of gender dysphoria at all. Not only have the rates of these girls claiming trans identification risen dramatically in the US and all across the West, over 4,400% rise in teen girls presenting for gender treatment at the UK's National Gender Clinic, for instance. But teenage girls are now the leading demographic of those claiming to have gender dysphoria.
BLM protesters have been calling for defunding the police since last May when George Floyd was killed in police custody. And this time, the protesters have been out since Sunday.
Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god! Shit! Shit! Look at y'all stupid! You came out with a sword!
You are stealing! Black people, stop!
And tonight, I just got word. The person who died was a Patriot person. He was a fucking Nazi. Our community held its own and took out the trash.
I wanted
to talk about the mass gaslighting we've seen in the past 2 weeks. The left love to redefine words. Racist, fascist, bigot, sexist. These words have been misused and overused so much they have lost all meaning. Now the left are redefining what peaceful means. Any protest that has seen multiple murders, bashings, widespread looting and destruction of property is not peaceful. This is not peaceful. That was from California. This is from Antifa Central in Portland.
Holy, stop! He's done! Leave him alone!
The full video shows the activists continuing to hector the man even as he lays bleeding on the road. So peaceful. Also in Portland, this man was bashed for standing peacefully with the American flag.
Because we're done with people like you. I have your opinion.
And this was Dave Dawn, a former St. Louis police captain who had served the community for 38 years. The 77-year-old grandfather was shot dead trying to defend a store from protesters and looters. These are just a few examples of the violence. These are not peaceful protests. You don't have more than a dozen people killed, many more bashed. You don't have businesses and homes burned to the ground in peaceful protests. Imagine for a second if Trump supporters were involved in mass protests that saw the sort of lawlessness we've seen in recent days. You think the media would be falling over themselves to portray the protests as mainly peaceful because the majority weren't involved in the violence? You think celebrities and the political class would be putting up bail money for those arrested? No. They'd be painted as violent extremists, and anyone associated with the protest would be similarly condemned. Now, celebrities are pushing for the police to be defunded.
Chicago, often called the murder capital of the world, but when you look at per capita homicides, St. Louis and Baltimore are 3 times worse. First, St. Louis.
An incredibly violent weekend in St. Louis.
3 people are dead, including a teenager, after several shootings since yesterday afternoon.
And in the city of St. Louis, police are searching for the person that murdered a teenager downtown. That happened across the street from a fast food restaurant. That's just one of 8 shootings involving teens. St. Louis police are working tonight. This map shows each of those shootings that happened within 24 hours from North to South City.
Large police presence on Sullivan, where 6 people have been shot. 3 of them are dead.
And this follows several shootings in St. Louis yesterday.
It's been a violent summer in St. Louis. Just hours ago, a triple shooting in North City left 1 man dead, 2 others hurt. This as police and community leaders are working on a plan to cure the violence.
And then there's Baltimore.
Good morning, Christian. Well, everyone we spoke with is just sick of the violence, those living in Northwest Baltimore and just residents of the city in general. Now, last night, Mayor Brandon Scott went out into the Northwest Baltimore community, walking around on those streets after 6 people were shot, and talked with residents there.
The city has experienced a bloody wave of violence this week, and many residents are fed up. WJC investigator Mike Helgren stays on the story live at City Hall. Mike.
Vic, Nicole, at least 20 people have been shot in Baltimore City alone in just the past week.
Another violent weekend in Baltimore City where at least 2 people died and more were hurt. Murders are outpacing last year's numbers and keep climbing.
Here and the city's Eastern District have had 118 shootings the past year, tied for the most.
Within the last week, there were 23 shootings across the city of Baltimore, with a third of the victims accounted for being teenagers.
Recall the most recent Memorial Day weekend?
Memorial Day marks the traditional start of summer, and in Chicago, it unfortunately coincides with a spike in violence.
WGN's Jenna Barnes is live from CPD headquarters with the latest on efforts to stop that violence. Jenna?
Dina and Ray, Chicago police have canceled days off. They're working in 12-hour shifts this Memorial Day weekend. So far, 30 people have been shot, 2 of them killed.
Chicago police on the scene of a shooting and a crash on the west side. At least one person was injured. It is one of several dozen violent incidents this holiday weekend.
3 people were shot and killed in Chicago this past Memorial Day weekend.
That was Memorial Day weekend. But weekend after weekend after weekend in Chicago, the violence continues to grow.
Chicago pastors uniting in the city's south side, heartbroken over the violence from this past weekend.
But somebody, for God's sake, do something.
Since the police has not been able to come down here for the last year, let's say the last 10 months, definitely there's been an increase in violence. My customers are not coming. I had one employee that quit because he feared for his life.
This street is where we at is 37th Street, and then you have 38th Street. In the beginning of 37th Street and 36th Street is like United States. And when you come in this area, which is 37th, 38th, and 39th Street, is like Mexico. Whereas lawlessness and where you can do something over here in the United States and you can run over here, it is like Mexico, where police won't be able to come, they won't come over here and chase you, or you can do anything that's lawlessness and then come in this area, it's like a shelter, you'll be protected.
I feel like I remember a time for maybe the last 2 years when every single conservative and Republican was saying this war on police being waged by the media and Democrats and the defund the police movement was very obviously going to lead to an increase in crime in inner cities. And lo and behold, there has been a violence increase in inner cities, clearly the result of this defund the police initiative that Democrats were just raving about. So here's the thing though. Now they've switched it and they flipped it like they do, and they say it's actually our fault. I guess we should, let's just start with this video of Jen Psaki answering why this is happening, why the homicide rates in large cities are up more than 30% in a year, and it's just absurd.
Part of his announcement is also ensuring there's specific guidance to communities across the country to ensure that they have funding to get more community police around the country. Something that was supported by the American Jobs Plan that was voted into law by Democrats just a couple of months ago. Some might say that the other party was for defunding the police. I'll let others say that, but that's a piece.
I'm trying to comprehend just lying with a straight face like that. It's weird. It's like nobody can believe it. Even if you're the most radical Democrat, if you're just a radical leftist, you know that Republicans are the party of law and order and have done everything that we possibly can to stop this defund the police movement.
Portland's defunding its police department may have backfired. In Oregon, Mayor Ted Wheeler is now asking for $2 million in emergency funding to deal with a surge in gun violence. An op-ed in the Washington Examiner notes that the city's murder rate has increased 2,000%. That is sad. And says, quote, "This is what happens when people who are tasked with actually running a city embrace ridiculous ideologies to please activists. I would say that Portland residents deserve better. But this is the leadership they chose for their city," end quote.
Absolutely. I mean, I sat in Los Angeles during summer of 2020 and watched people tear the streets apart, essentially, while on the news at that moment. There was a caster saying, well, you know, one man's riot is really another man's protest. It all depends on the language that you use, right? So, I mean, they know we know they're lying. They do not care. They do it over and over again. But this is my question for you guys. Like, does this mean that they're caught? Do you know what I mean? Like, defunding the police is suddenly a bad thing now because it so obviously leads to... It's the same thing with CRT, right? We call them out on this. We call them out on teaching racism to children, indoctrinating them into this. And then they say, well, what's CRT really? You know, it doesn't really exist. I sort of feel as if this means they know that if they hold to this line, they'll be caught.
My God, I want to scream listening to these people who are either the most evil or the dumbest people on planet Earth. They know for a fact that they were yelling, defund the police, dismantle the police. They've seen the decline in law enforcement. They've seen people walk off the police department. They've seen morale go to the tanks, and that has directly resulted in crime going out of the roof. Now the people are yelling at them, and they want their heads now because their communities are destroyed, and then they want to pivot and say this had everything to do with Donald Trump. There is a bigger agenda here, and I feel like they want to eradicate local law enforcement so they can make law enforcement in this country federalized. So when they come for you and say you better put a mask on, local police don't have to abide by that, but if it was federalized, they will. When they come for you, senile Joe Biden want to take away magazines from the AR, they're going to enforce those things federally.
And the question of whether it's real when it's there, that requires enormous transparency. You got to make all of it available to other experts across the nation so they can look and see. So there's consensus, this is a safe vaccine.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm joined today by Commissioner Fuller from New South Wales Police and Brigadier Garraway from the Australian Defence Force to announce the increase in capabilities from the Australian Defence Force as part of the nationwide Operation COVID Assist by the Australian Defence Force. What we will see from today are 300 ADF personnel assisting with police to ensure there is maximum compliance when it comes to the current public health orders.
If the president announced tomorrow we have a vaccine, would you take it? Only if it was completely transparent that other experts in the country could look at it. Only if we knew all of what went into it.
Apart from emergency medical care, there is literally no reason for you to leave your home. And if you were to leave your home and not be found there, you will have a very difficult time convincing Victoria Police that you had a lawful reason.
If Donald Trump can't give answers and the administration can't give answers to these three questions, the American people should not have confidence.
But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it. But if Donald Trump tells us that we should take it, I'm not taking it.
I wanted to talk about the mass gaslighting we've seen in the past 2 weeks.
That was just a little taste of the mandatory cognitive dissonance that's served up by media gaslighting as of late. Up is down, left is right, men are women, women are men, and the liberals are now acting like fascists, while the conservatives are too busy blaming hypocrisy, stupidity, and a power-hungry attitude on the left, when it seems to be more a universal kind of spirit of chaos that's taking over people. So it doesn't matter really who's in power. We see, for instance, Barack Obama took over the policies of George Bush and continued and expanded them. The bailouts, the wars, the invasion of privacy, it was something that was already in place. He inherited it and he expanded it and he did his job. But as a liberal and a man of mixed race, we weren't allowed to criticize him. So Trump was the straw man, the easy target, played the buffoon and the fool, and he said true things that are now off limits because if you repeat them, you're automatically seen as a radical right supporter of insurrectionists and racists. So that's how both parties are playing that game. It just so happens that the Republicans are now making a little bit more sense now that the liberals are in the White House. So I hope that clears some things up. Now let's get back to the movie in particular. It's worth noting here before I go further, I'm not suggesting that this film and the analysis of it alone, single-handedly, are going to warp the minds of a generation or society. Remember what I said about the gaslighting. It is a grooming process. It's not a singular event of misinformation. It's more like a constant repetition and psychological manipulation. So one film and one film review are not going to cut it. It's a constant reinforcement through false paradigms, abuse, and psychosomatic stimulation. So this film uses a particular type of psychological manipulation. And then there's a secondary manipulation that goes viral on social media, like YouTube, which analyzes and purports itself to be fan theories of the movie itself. And some of these fan theories online get better numbers than independent movies streaming on Netflix or Amazon. I think it's worth noting that it's really become a $1 million industry in and of itself to produce film analysis. These film analysis channels are corporate sponsored and have talking points provided to them by the studios that produce the movies. So they're further film productions. So part of the production for marketing a movie is spent on guys like this. I'm going to show you a warning of media brainwashing, which is itself brainwashing you. Along with the movie itself, I'm focusing on a viral breakdown of the film with almost 3 million views from a YouTube channel called Acolytes of Horror, which warns us of the film's brainwashing, but is itself a subtle, sophisticated form of brainwashing. Once we go through it with a critical lens, I think that's going to be obvious to the overwhelming majority of people that stick through this presentation. So if we go over to YouTube and type in Midsommar Explained or Midsommar Decoded, we will find videos which have multiple million views. There's quite a number of them that are over 1 million views. Some of the less popular ones that show up in the top couple pages of search results still have hundreds of thousands of views. And we're going to be focusing in this presentation on one that has about 2.7 million views from a year ago, and that is How Midsommar Brainwashes You from Acolytes of Horror. And spoiler alert, what we'll find towards the end of that video is anti-Christian programming in a very obvious, plain spoken bait and switch. You think you're signing up for a movie review and then you get a anti-Christian blog at the end. But what I'm suggesting here is there's a programming for a recipe of chaos. I'll ultimately suggest that the film and the culture surrounding it are inherently anti-Christian and anti-male, but I will stress the fact that Christianity and masculinity serve here as platforms for which this disruptive agency and spirit is tempting increasingly larger amounts of people into conflict and chaos that affects all of us, regardless of what your beliefs, gender, orientation, or way of life may be. This spirit of rebellion and chaos is an equal opportunity corrupter. And I want to reiterate the fact that I will be doing a little bit of movie decoding, which I've been known for doing for a number of years now, but this isn't just a horror movie review or a decoding. This might be one of my most important messages ever. The types of programming and mental manipulation used in this film and the subsequent coverage of the film in pop culture media will ultimately affect all of us, as it is pervasive and subtle, and if it doesn't warp your mind, it's warping the minds of people whom you live with or work with and are surrounded by. This literally is a system that is affecting us all right now, and I'm not exaggerating. We have a number of different platforms, all simultaneously seeming to come to a head in the media that are stimulating incredibly unhealthy feelings and unhealthy controversy. And what we are looking at is media gaslighting. And I'll remind you, 8 years ago, this type of psychological manipulation was actually approved of by the Supreme Court. You remember the old video I did called Baltimore by Design? And the subtitle there was Foreign Policy Comes Home. Well, that's literally the case, and it was approved of by the Supreme Court that U.S. media and government can propagandize its own citizenry. So a couple of acts from the 40s and the 80s were rolled back so that misinformation with a military bent can be used on the public. Now, where are they going to provide that? Well, on the 5 major corporate news networks. That's where. So those outlets are outlets of a military Cold War. So we're living in a Cold War. People are worried about catching a cold. And they're worried about, well, I'd say the media might be worried about people catching on to the Cold War, which is why when we have seriously sophisticated brainwashing in the form of Midsommar in effect, the media is going to make sure that they sponsor movie reviews that then reinforce the programming and, well, fill up the trending search results so that opinions like mine and other people who take a critical analysis of this type of gaslighting and media manipulation are heard far less often and are relegated to a tiny little corner of the internet. And, I'm not wiped off the internet. Otherwise, I'd find some other outlet. I'd come back with a different name and identity and get bigger using their tactics. So they just put baby in the corner and leave them there. And then you point to the people in the corner and you go, that's where all the crazy people are. And they make up 0.whatever% of the views that get seen when people are looking for this kind of information. And so we have a false paradigm, and then we have officially approved of conspiracy theories, and we even have officially approved of opinions about movies, which are filled with Easter eggs, and people have caught on to that. Stanley Kubrick wasn't the only one using them. So when we watch these movies, we look for Easter eggs, and there is $1 million industry supported by the film studios, which teaches us how to look for the Easter eggs, and they teach you how to think, or not to think. I would suggest that having spent as much time studying and thinking about esoteric patterns and psychological manipulation in media, I feel comfortable saying I'm an expert on this subject, and I find that I can often represent a nuanced and sophisticated breakdown of film that I can't find anywhere else. If people were to ask me, hey Jason, I like what you did breaking down this such and such movie, who else do you recommend I listen to? And I'm at a loss for words. I don't have any students, and I don't know of anybody else doing quite what I do. But there's a lot of people that pretend to break down esoteric symbolism and hidden Easter eggs, but that's not actually what they're doing. In fact, very often they're hiding them in plain sight. It's almost, it's kind of like a sick game. Anyway, I'm going to break down this film, and there's going to be some spoilers. We're going to do a little synopsis of the plot line and get to know the characters so that we've got a frame of reference for what kind of programming we're looking at. And then we'll get to the sponsored breakdown of the film, which is itself reinforcing further the brainwashing of the film. So the film brainwashes you, then you try to figure out what the hell did I just watch, and then someone else continues to take advantage of you and warp your mind further. It's a pretty abusive system, and I would suggest that if people collectively got together and were able to articulate this in any kind of substantive way, we could get a class action lawsuit against these media corporations for systematically inciting mental unwellness. So I thought it would be good to look at the main trailer for the film before we get into the breakdown.
I told you that I want to go to that festival in Sweden.
No, you said it would be cool to go.
Yeah, and then I got the opportunity and I decided to do it.
I don't mind you going. I just wish you would have told me, that's all.
Dude, she needs a therapist. You've been wanting out of this stupid relationship for like a year now.
And don't forget about all of the beautiful Swedish women you'll meet in June.
Okay, guys.
That's not her again. Seriously?
Babe, what's happening? Danny.
I was so very sorry to hear about what happened.
I'm sorry.
I invited Danny to come to Sweden. You know what she's been going through.
Christian says you've got this special week planned.
It's sort of a crazy festival. Special ceremonies and dressing up.
That sounds fun.
Unbelievable.
Welcome and happy midsummer. Skål!
What time is it?
9 p.m.
That can't be right. The sky is blue.
This is what 9 p.m. is like here.
How long have you two been together?
Just over 3.5 years.
4 years.
Really?
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's like another world.
Tomorrow's a big day.
Is it scary?
What is it?
It has special properties.
What am I going through?
We just need to acclimate.
I don't want to acclimate. I want to go.
Absolutely not.
What's happening? I don't know why you invited us.
That's why you look so guilty right now, because you know.
We only do this every 90 years. I was most excited for you to come.
So as you can see from the trailer, Danny and Christian are in a relationship that is on the rocks, so to speak, and we'll get back to that kind of symbolism. Danny is a boy's name, it's worth noting, and Christian is a religion, not just the name of the protagonist, who is a redhead with blue eyes. So we've got red, white, and blue Christian going to a pagan festival with his friends, but not before Danny is shown some gaslighting. We as the audience are set up for gaslighting at the beginning of the film when we're told that Danny's sister, who is bipolar, gassed her parents to death with carbon monoxide poisoning and then taped a hose to herself after stuffing one under the bedroom door of her parents while they were sleeping and killing all three of them. So that's a double homicide/suicide, and we're introduced to this scene with the flickering strobing lights of the emergency responders and then the gassing. So we've got gaslighting embedded in the very symbolism at the beginning of the film. Now, it's definitely worth noting here that Christian has a name Christian, and he's red, white, and blue. Blue-eyed, red hair, fair skin. He is a red, white, and blue American Christian, and he's destabilized by a tragedy. Pele invites him to a pagan festival in Sweden. So we have a destabilized Christian going to Sweden, and Pele's a bit of a sport coat. He knows that it's probably not a good idea to bring Danny along, but he convinces her to come along anyway when she's actually going to stay behind. So he's going behind Christian's back to make a connection with Christian's girl while they're on the rocks. It's also worth noting that Mark and Josh, or Joshua, are also Christian names. So we've got Mark, Joshua, and Christian going to Hälsingland. Hal, I think of Hal 9000. Hälsingland, and their coat of arms is a beast with red horns. That's pretty handsome. So we've got a trifecta of Christians, and they're destabilized, and they've invited Danny along by accident. They didn't think she was going to come along, and she is terribly upset over a tragedy in her family, and she's lost. So these guys are PhD students, and it seems like for the most part they got their shit together, but there's some uncertainty, and then the tragedy, and then they arrive in Hälsingland and immediately take psychedelics. So there's some esoteric and occult symbolism and happenings going on. It's worth noting Ari Aster, the director, his first film, Hereditary, takes up a similar theme of inviting occultism into a destabilized environment, and all hell breaks loose. Now, from what I can tell, based on my analysis, as well as a kind of perceptive sensibility that is partially thanks to a Gnostic awareness, I would say there's a fractal in this film of destabilization. Danny's destabilized by a tragedy. She's in a destabilized relationship. They go to a foreign land and are destabilized by psychedelics, and this is functioning as a blueprint. We have a formerly Christian nation destabilized by multiple different incidents and tragedies that then cause a bit of an exodus. Now, this could be a physical exodus and moving around of people, but it also could be an exodus spiritually. And Danny is a symbol of kind of a weak link. And not necessarily completely her fault. She's a victim of a tragedy, and now she is functioning like an unlocked door that lets in a dark spirit in the form of Pele, who then takes advantage of this entire group of people because he wants to use Danny in a pagan ritual in which she is the May Queen. And I think of May Queen as complementary to the May King. Making. This is in the making. And the people in the commune here, in this pagan commune, they wear white with blue, and I think of the stitching on their clothing reinforcing this idea of blueprints. There's a lot of backwards symbolism as well, and other types of occult imagery. So we have a backwards cult antithetical to Christianity. So the cult of the pagan Antichrist is inviting in and destabilizing and corrupting Christians. So this is further reinforced in the symbolism of the breakdown of the film that I'm going to go into as well. So remember this pattern. A fractal of destabilization and disorientation is then reinforced through brainwashing. That happens to the characters in the film, and it happens to fans of the movie who try to understand the destabilizing film and then are sold the anti-Christian rhetoric that is going to function as an ingredient in the blueprints that this film spells out. So we are fed entertainment that is psychologically manipulating us and showing us fractals, the same story over and over on different levels that we integrate and take into our psyche. And these fractals, these patterns that are integrated into us through the pop culture media, become like a psycho-spiritual muscle memory that we rely on when destabilized. So when the world gets a bit chaotic, we look to our heroes or whatever inspiring moments we can think of, and very often they're going to come out of pop culture and pop music and movies, or maybe a political leader or some kind of cultural figure. So whether it's Ronald Reagan or Muhammad Ali or Iron Man, there's going to be patterns which have been, let's say, very often co-created by a spirit that is not always benevolent. And so you have to be very careful how you take in certain types of information and entertainment, because even enjoying a movie is a form of worship, and you are, well, there's only so many patterns you can fit in your brain, and when you keep repeating certain types of patterns, your brain's going to be more likely to recall those patterns when you need to call upon that kind of psycho-spiritual muscle memory. And very often we're not doing this consciously. So this is very much brainwashing.
Whoa, who's that one?
That's last year's May Queen.
Beautiful.
You know, I'm very, very glad you're coming.
So Danny is targeted by Pele in the same way that the viewer is targeted by the entertainment, and possibly in the same way that many of the people involved in producing the entertainment are targeted by a co-creative faculty. So what are the co-creators up to? What are their aspirations? What do they hope to create? If they don't have benevolent intentions but are merely self-serving people with a cultural mishmash of beliefs and not really any kind of God or spiritual mindedness in their life, they can still create incredibly corrupt and kind of antichrist embedded entertainments without intending to do so. But I would suggest that people who are intentionally making horror films are right out the gate, you already know it's part of the deal that the film is going to fuck you up. Like, it's designed to fuck with your head. You're signing up for this to a degree. And so some of the people that make this entertainment are going to say to themselves, you know, you knew what you were getting into here.
Nature just knows instinctually how to stay in harmony.
Sorry. I'm gonna go for a walk. It's almost your birthday. You're okay. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine. Thank you.
So in that scene where Danny is having a bad reaction to some psychedelics, she leaves the group that she's with, and then she encounters a group of people that seem to be having a good time. Danny thinks they're laughing at her, and then she makes her way into the outhouse, where she has a hallucination of her dead sister. It almost seems like she was moving away from a pleasant environment on a couple occasions in order to go put herself in a dark, smelly closet. It's full of shit. The symbolism there suggests that Danny's a bit of a glutton for punishment or wants to be miserable. There's something off about her, and they recognize this in her when she's greeted at the beginning of the festival. They say, "Welcome home."
Hello. Hello. Hey. Hello. Hello. Welcome. Hi. Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome home.
Oh.
Welcome.
Hi.
Welcome home.
Oh.
Oh, we are so very happy to have you.
So here we see Danny getting a unique greeting when she arrives at the festival. The greeter says, "Welcome home," as if she belongs there. Now, she has been psychologically primed for gaslighting by the tragedy of the double murder and suicide committed by her sister, whom she may share something with, not just biologically, but there might be something inherently dark with Danny that is recognized by Pele, who has groomed her and selected her for the next May Queen. So there's some foreshadowing that she's already been picked out before she leaves the United States. Now, she doesn't fit in the United States anymore, partially due to her nature and her relationship with Christian, and partially due to the tragedy in her family. There's an inverted fairy tale series of patterns and symbols that are hidden in plain sight early in the film that suggest this is something of a Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, Three Little Bears story. And the writer and director, Ari Aster, mentioned that this works as a kind of fairy tale for fucked up adults. We can even see here on top of the icebox, we've got the scarecrow, or the straw man, in Christian's friend's apartment.
Yeah, that's all. The crystal's gone dark.
Oh, you don't suppose she could really be sick, do you?
I also noticed this film functions in a way similar to The Wizard of Oz, in which Danny's character would be like Dorothy, and the characters surrounding Dorothy in one way represent aspects of her own nature, which is divided and needs to be reintegrated, kind of like an alchemical process. So Danny has a bit of a problem with her psyche and personality. So she goes through this traumatic event, then goes on to into another land, goes on a journey, much like Dorothy. And in this inverted fairy tale, instead of incorporating the different aspects of her psyche, instead of finding courage and heart and bravery and compassion and intelligence, she kills off these aspects of herself so that she can fully embrace the dark nature that is also in her dead sister. And it seems like she wants to move towards darkness instead of light. So there's something fucked up about Danny, and she gets off to a bad start with the psychedelics.
Oh! Read the directions, and directly you'll be directed in the right direction.
Drink me. Better look first, for if one drinks much from a bottle marked poison, it's almost certain to disagree with one sooner or later.
Beg your pardon?
I was just giving myself some good advice. But, tastes like cherry tart, custard, pineapple, roast turkey. Goodness! What did I do?
You almost went out like a candle.
But look, I'm just the right size.
Oh, no use. I forgot to tell you. I'm locked.
Oh, no.
But of course, you've got the key, so...
What key?
Now, don't tell me you left it up there.
Oh, dear. Whatever will I do?
Try the box, naturally.
Oh! Eat me. All right. But goodness knows what this will do. Whoa, 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 whoa! What did you say?
I said a little of that went a long way.
So Danny complains of a stomach ache, which is why she takes some kind of tincture that is psychedelic instead of eating the mushrooms like the rest of her friends. So this tincture is prepared for her. She doesn't know what's in it. We later find that it's a different kind of psychedelic than just eating the plain psilocybin mushrooms. So at the beginning of her journey in Sweden, she's already been hand-selected to go on a different type of journey.
Inte högre. Inte hetare.
Ada!
let our 9-day feast commence. Skål! Skål!
In a number of different ways, this film uses hidden in plain sight foreshadowing to show you what's going to happen. This happens in a lot of horror movies where you kind of hope for the best, but you know something bad's going to happen, and they show you, what's probably going to be the fate of some characters before they meet that fate, and you're kind of stuck watching, say, a car wreck you know you shouldn't be looking at, but you can't look away as it unfolds in front of you. This kind of psychological manipulation in a lot of horror movies is, well, I'm going to get into how I unpack that methodology in regards to this film and in horror films and in psychologically manipulative media in general in part 2. But I just wanted to point out one aspect of that kind of plain sight symbolism that is manifold. We have Danny embracing an evil spirit. We find out later this cult is very similar to a personification of an antichrist spirit. In this cult, people's lives are mapped out for them, and you know what's going to happen throughout these 9-year periods in your life. And when people reach the age of 72, they either commit suicide or are killed. And when I think of the different numbers and patterns in here, I think of this 72 marker being not unlike a marker for 3 days.
What happens at 72?
And the 3-day symbolism in Christian mythology is how long Christ spends in death before he is resurrected. So we have like a fractal. We are shown a short, quick version of the movie in symbolism before the entire movie plays out. And we are shown like a 3-day fractal of the 72-year fractal. So you've got 72 hours that map out and map onto the 72-year cycle. And after 3 days at this fucking place, you'll be willing to kill yourself. That's pretty much how that symbolism maps out onto itself. There's a myriad of other symbols I'll unpack, including but not limited to the overlap between ideas of the Antichrist in the New Testament and symbolism in Islam and their connection with Freemasonry and paganism. And I'll also point out how there's a lot of esoteric symbolism in this movie, including the runes and some other artwork that is focused on by some of the media breakdowns, which are a bit of a distraction. At the end of the day, when I spent a lot of time looking at the runic symbols, essentially a very simple message is told. Everything's backwards here, and you're going to have a bad time. Meanwhile, a much more heavily and deeply embedded symbolism references some of the Christian imagery and the methodology of gaslighting that I pointed out. And there is kind of a story that seems to be, basically the way it reads out symbolically is there's a plan for Danny in this movie, and there's a plan for Christian. And Christian maps onto not just the protagonist he portrays, but for Christian America in general. And this idea of America being a once Christian nation and how it has been fragmented, polarized, and set against itself. And then certain types of archetypal figures are used as scapegoats to pay the price or bear the burden of the punishment for something they haven't done, essentially. So Christian ends up playing that scapegoat role, much like Christ is a scapegoat for the sins of others in the New Testament, and much like certain, let's say, ideological boogeyman are held up and then burned at the stake in American pop culture in order to, let's say, exercise a type of demonic spirit that is within people. There's a contagion or pandemic going on, but there's also a social contagion and a spirit. So think of that multi-level meaning of the word spirit. Breath, pneuma, or ruach means wind, spirit, breath. So there's an ill wind blowing, a bad breath. People are covering up their breath with their face masks, and that also maps onto spirit. So once the same word, it is now fragmented, and we see the character of Danny, once whole, has been fragmented by tragedy, and then these different components of herself are being distracted and killed off one by one by a pagan cult that appears to be something like a solar sun worshipping cult, as well as Freemasonic, as well as Islamic and Abrahamic. So there's a lot to unpack there. It's going to take a while, so I'm going to get into that in part 2. We're going to take a look at the symbol of the bear as it appears in New Testament scripture and throughout the Bible, how that maps onto Christian's character, and I'll go back over some of those ideas I just mentioned in detail as it pertains to the symbolism in the film. So I hope you enjoyed this first installment. Part 2 will involve some of the decoding of that esoteric symbolism, and then we'll get into the brainwashing tactics of the movie breakdown, the movie fans, the fan theories and the breakdowns that double down on some of the psychological manipulation and gaslighting that makes up this film. So the film is brainwashing, the media breakdowns are brainwashing, and they're also a form of kind of precognition programming, psychological priming, and predictive programming. And a bit of literacy in biblical and esoteric symbolism will help us see how it's spelled out in plain sight, hidden in plain sight. So while movie decoders are worrying about how horrible a boyfriend Christian is and what all the runes mean, the actual story is played out with symbolism that's more visual instead of, hidden details in the background. It's actually more of a psychological priming that plays out through symbolism that's hidden right in front of your face.
How long have you two been together?
Just over 3.5 years.
4 years.
Really?
Yeah?
What do you think?
It's like another world.
Tomorrow's a big day.
Is it scary?
What is it?
It has special properties. What am I going through?
We just need to acclimate.
I don't want to acclimate, I want to go.
Absolutely not.
What's happening?